Elena Marlowe was finalizing her wedding guest list when her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. She didn't expect the message to change anything. She was wrong. Your sister's wedding is the family priority. We won't be able to attend yours. No apology. No explanation. No pause to soften the blow. Elena stared at the screen, the cursor blinking in the open document on her laptop like it was waiting for her to react the way she always did, quietly, reasonably, without making anyone uncomfortable. Instead, she typed 2 words. That's fine. She hit send, closed the laptop, and sat there longer than she meant to. From the outside, the Marlowe family had always looked close. Holiday photos framed the living room wall, matching outfits, coordinated smiles. The illusion of balance. But Elena had learned early that balance in her family didn't mean equality. It meant orbit. And the center of that orbit had always been her younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was brightness and celebration. Chloe was the story they told at dinner parties. Her achievements were announced loudly, proudly, as if the entire room needed to pause and admire them. Elena's accomplishments, by contrast, were received with polite nods, acknowledgments, not celebrations. She just needs more attention. Their mother used to say when Chloe threw tantrums or demanded changes, "You're the independent one," their father would add, as if independence were a reason to be ignored. Elena became adaptable by necessity. She learned to bend without breaking, to make room so others didn't have to. When Chloe forgot birthdays, Elena understood. When plans changed at the last minute to accommodate Chloe's needs, Elena adjusted. And now, once again, Elena was expected to adjust. Her wedding had been planned quietly, carefully. No spectacle, no competition, just something meaningful, something hers. But Chloe's wedding was bigger, louder, more impressive. And that, apparently, made it more important. The realization didn't come with anger, not yet. It arrived as clarity. Elena walked through her apartment, past boxes of invitations sealed in soft cream envelopes, past a dress hanging in the spare room. Untouched, she imagined her parents' refrigerator covered in Chloe's glossy engagement photos, while her own invitation sat unopened on a counter somewhere, forgotten. It wasn't the first time she'd been placed second. It was simply the first time. She didn't rush to excuse it. That night, Elena stood at the window, city lights reflecting back at her like quiet witnesses. She realized something unsettling and freeing all at once. Her family didn't deprioritize her by accident. They did it because she always made it easy. And for the first time in her life, Elena Marlowe decided she would stop being easy to overlook. Elena learned early that not all support announces itself. Some of it arrives quietly, without speeches, or declarations, without demanding gratitude in return. It slips into your life like a hand at your back when the room grows heavy steady, unseen by everyone else, but unmistakably there. In the Marlowe household, voices rose and fell depending on who was speaking. Chloe's laughter filled rooms. Chloe's disappointments demanded attention. Elena's presence, by contrast, was something the house seemed to breathe around rather than notice. But there were always a few people who noticed anyway. Her grandmother, Margaret Marlowe, was the first. Margaret never raised her voice at family dinners. She didn't interrupt or argue when Elena was overlooked. She simply watched ties sharp, memories sharper, and later, when plates were cleared and conversations drifted back to Chloe's plans, Margaret would lean closer to Elena and murmur things like, "I saw you," or "that mattered," even if no one said it. At first, Elena didn't understand how powerful those words were. She only knew they made something in her chest loosen, just a little. Margaret never compared the sisters. She never asked Elena to be patient or understanding. Instead, she asked questions no one else did. Are you tired? Do you want this? Or are you doing it because it's expected? When was the last time someone showed up for you? Those questions lingered long after visits ended. Then there was her cousin Rachel. Rachel was only a few years older, but she had escaped the family gravity early, moved away, built her own life, learned how to observe without getting pulled back in. She remembered Elena's birthdays when others forgot. She sent messages after graduations that read, "I'm proud of you," without adding a comparison. When Elena once joked about being the background sister, Rachel didn't laugh. "That's not a joke," she said simply. "That's something they taught you to believe." Those words stayed. Quiet allies didn't try to fix Elena's family. They didn't push her to confront anyone or force apologies that would never come. They did something far more dangerous to the illusion Elena lived under. They validated her. Reality. At holidays, when Elena sat on the edge of group conversations, Rachel would slide into the seat beside her, changing the dynamic without calling attention to it. When Elena's parents praised Chloe's achievements for the third time in a single meal, Margaret would turn to Elena and ask about her work, then listen fully, without glancing at anyone else. It wasn't defiance. It was recognition. And recognition, Elena slowly realized, was a form of love. Years passed like this. Elena grew successful, composed, reliable, the one everyone leaned on but rarely checked in with. She told herself she didn't need much. That independence was strength. That silence was peace. But the presence of her quiet allies planted a different truth beneath that narrative. That being unseen wasn't a virtue. That entrance wasn't the same as belonging. That love didn't require you to disappear. The night her mother texted about the wedding about prioritizing Chloe, Elena thought of Margaret immediately. She imagined her grandmother's pause, the way her mouth would tighten, not in anger, but in disappointment that felt sharper than any outburst. And she knew, without calling, without explaining, that Margaret would understand. She also knew Rachel would, too. That knowledge didn't erase the hurt, but it steadied it, anchored it. Because while Elena's parents were busy choosing sides, there were people in her life who had already chosen her quietly, consistently, without conditions. They didn't need grand gestures or public declarations. They didn't compete for attention or rewrite history. They showed up. And in the stillness that followed her mother's message, Elena finally saw the truth with startling clarity. She was never alone. She was just surrounded by people who mistook her silence for absence. Quiet allies exist not to save you, not to fight your battles, but to remind you who you are when the noise tries to erase you. And for the first time, Elena wondered what might happen if she built her future around those voices instead of the ones that had always spoken over her. Elena didn't remember when the label first appeared, only that, one day, it had become permanent. Reasonable, flexible, understanding. They were words spoken with praise, but used like instructions. Whenever Chloe wanted something changed, delayed, or race-centered around her needs, Elena was the one asked to adapt. It was never framed as favoritism, always as practicality. Chloe's emotional right now, their mother would say, voice careful and tired. You don't mind adjusting, do you? Their father would add, already assuming the answer. Elena learned early that resistance made things worse. If she pushed back, she was accused of being dramatic. If she asked for equal consideration, she was told she was making things difficult. But if she stayed calm, if she nodded, smiled, and agreed, everyone breathed easier. So she became the family's pressure valve. When Chloe changed plans last minute, Elena rearranged her schedule. When holidays shifted to suit Chloe's work or relationships, Elena celebrated on a different day. When conversations grew tense, Elena smoothed them over, translating emotions into something more palatable. The irony was cruel. The more adaptable she became, the more invisible she grew. Being reasonable meant her disappointment was never urgent. Being flexible meant her needs were always optional. At family gatherings, Elena often found herself defending choices she hadn't made. When Chloe borrowed money and missed repayments, Elena was asked to understand. When Chloe forgot milestones, Elena was told she didn't mean it like that. When Chloe's emotions ran high, Elena was reminded that she was the strong one. Strength, Elena realized, had become a liability. It was used to justify neglect. The scapegoat role wasn't about blame in loud, obvious ways. It was quieter than that. It lived in expectations, in assumptions, in the unspoken rule that Elena would absorb whatever disruption was necessary to keep the family image intact. And she did. For years, she learned to anticipate disappointment before it arrived, to cushion her own hopes, to downplay her achievements so they wouldn't compete. She stopped sharing plans until they were finalized, sometimes not even then. It was easier to manage expectations than to watch them be dismissed. The wedding became the clearest example of this role. When Chloe announced her date, Elena had already chosen hers. Different coast, different scale. No conflict until there suddenly was. And just like always, the expectation landed on Elena's shoulders, without discussion. "You're so independent," her mother said, as if that solved everything. "You'll understand." Her father added, as if understanding was the same as consenting. They didn't ask if Elena would move her wedding. They asked how soon she could. That was when Elena finally recognized the pattern for what it was. Flexibility had never been about compromise. Reasonableness had never been mutual. They weren't asking her to adjust because it made sense. They were asking because she always had. And for the first time, Elena didn't rush to comply. She sat with the discomfort, instead the unfamiliar weight of not fixing things. The quiet panic of stepping out of a role that had defined her for so long. The world didn't collapse. No one fell apart. The only thing that changed was the story Elena told herself. She began to understand that being adaptable had cost her something essential, the right to be considered without having to shrink. And as that realization settled, something shifted inside her. The reasonable one didn't disappear. She evolved. Reasonable no longer meant self-erasing. Flexible no longer meant disposable. And Elena Marlowe began to wonder carefully, steadily, what might happen if she stopped bending at all. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or raised voices. It arrived quietly on a night that looked like every other night Elena had spent being understanding. She was sitting at her kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling between her hands, when her phone buzzed again. Another message, another adjustment, another request framed as inevitability. "We've talked about the dates," her mother wrote. "It would just be easier if you moved yours. Chloe's under a lot of stress." Easier. That word landed with a dull thud. Elena read it twice, then a third time, as if the meaning might soften if she stared long enough. It didn't. Instead, something inside her, something that had been stretched thin for years, finally refused to stretch further. She didn't respond right away. That alone felt radical. For as long as she could remember, immediacy had been her currency. Quick replies, quick reassurance, quick compliance. Silence, on the other hand, had always been treated as defiance. Tonight, Elena let the silence breathe. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. Each one belonged to someone else's life, someone else's priorities. For the first time, she wondered why her own had always been negotiable. Memories surfaced. Uninvited. The college graduation Chloe missed because she lost track of time. The promotion dinner was scheduled because Chloe's schedule changed. The countless times Elena was told, "You're strong. You'll be fine." She had believed them. Or rather, she had trained herself to. Strength had become her armor and her cage. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Chloe. "Hey, Mom said you might be upset. Don't be dramatic. You know how these things go. It's just timing. Just timing." Elena closed her eyes and felt the weight of it. All years of being edited out, postponed, deprioritized. Years of translating other people's needs into reasons she should wait. She realized something then, with startling clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system. And systems don't change unless someone steps out of them. Elena returned to the table, opened her laptop, and pulled up her wedding plans. The venue, the invitations, the careful choices she had made because they mattered to her. She imagined moving everything again, imagined explaining to vendors, to friends, to herself why her life needed to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. The thought made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with resolve. She typed a reply to her mother. "I won't be moving my wedding." She paused, fingers hovering, the old reflex screaming at her to soften it, to add a smile, an apology, a justification. She did in single quotes. She hit send. The quiet that followed felt enormous, unfamiliar, alive. Almost immediately, the responses began. Her mother called. Elena let it ring. Her father texted. "Let's talk this through." Chloe sent a voice note, half laughter, half irritation. "You're really doing this?" Elena listened once, then deleted it. For the first time, she didn't step in to manage their reactions. She didn't explain. She didn't negotiate. She let them feel what she had always buffered. And the world kept turning. Hours passed, then a night, then a morning. Elena woke up with a knot in her stomach, but beneath it was something else. Space. The kind that appears when you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. She called her grandmother later that day. "I didn't move it," Elena said quietly. Margaret didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice. She simply said, "Good." That single word steadied her more than any reassurance ever had. Rachel texted soon after, "Proud of you." About time. Elena smiled, a small, real smile. The turning point wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't about revenge. It was about permission. Permission Elena had finally given herself. Permission to be inconvenient. Permission to disappoint. Permission to choose without explaining. She understood now that the role of the reasonable one had kept the peace by costing her herself. And peace that requires disappearance isn't peace at all. Standing in her kitchen, sunlight pulling across the floor, Elena felt something shift permanently. She wasn't asking for a seat anymore. She was building her own table. And whoever wanted to be there would have to choose her clearly, intentionally, without conditions. For the first time in her life, Elena Marlowe was no longer waiting to be prioritized. She was prioritizing herself. Elena didn't announce the change. She didn't post anything. She didn't update the family group chat or defend her decision with paragraphs of explanation. She simply pivoted. The morning after she sent that message, "I won't be moving my wedding," Elena woke with a familiar ache of anxiety in her chest, but beneath it was something new, a steady, deliberate calm. The kind that comes not from certainty, but from finally acting in alignment with yourself. She made coffee, opened her laptop, and pulled up a folder she'd created months ago and never shared with anyone. Alternate plans. The time, she'd told herself it was just practical, a backup, a precaution in case schedules conflicted or venues fell through. But as she stared at the screen now, she recognized the truth. Part of her had always known this moment was coming. Inside the folder were photos of a place she discovered late one night, while scrolling aimlessly, trying to quiet the familiar ache of being second. A small estate nestled among rolling hills, framed by old trees and wide skies. Nothing flashy, nothing competitive. Just space, warmth, intention. A place that didn't feel like a performance. Elena clicked through the images, slowly. Stone paths, long wooden tables, soft light that looked forgiving rather than demanding. She imagined standing there not being watched, not being compared, not waiting for approval. For the first time since the text from her mother, her breath deepened. She reached for her phone and called the venue coordinator. Yes, Elena said, calmly, when asked if she was still interested. I'm ready to move forward. That was the first quiet decision. The second was harder. She created a new guest list not by obligation, not by bloodline, but by honesty. She started with Rachel, who had never forgotten her milestones even when others had. Then her grandmother, whose support came without conditions. A handful of friends who had shown up over the years without needing reminders or reassurance. Each name felt like a small act of reclamation. She didn't invite everyone, and for the first time, she didn't feel guilty about that. Elena sent the invitations privately, handwritten notes, simple words. I'm getting married. I would love for you to be there. No explanations, no disclaimers, no apologies. The replies came back quietly, but decisively. Asterisk, of course. Wouldn't miss it. Thank you for inviting me. Each response reinforced what she was beginning to understand. People who value you don't need convincing. She told her fiancé last, not because she feared his reaction, but because she wanted to be clear before she spoke. They sat together that evening, the windows open, dusk settling softly round them. Elena explained everything, not with frustration, not with tears, but with clarity. I don't want a wedding that feels like another negotiation, she said. I want something that feels like us, even if it's smaller, even if it's quieter. He listened. He always did. When she finished, he reached for her hand and said simply, then that's the wedding we'll have. No debate, no hesitation, no conditions. Something inside Elena loosened then, like a knot she'd forgotten she was carrying. Over the next few weeks, she worked quietly. Venues were booked. Details were adjusted. The original plans, those shaped by expectations and family. Optics were gently dismantled and replaced with something truer. She didn't cancel the old plans loudly. She let them expire. When her mother called again, pressing, probing, trying to regain control of the narrative, Elena kept her responses brief. I've got it handled. It's taken care of. We're happy with the plan. Each sentence was a boundary, calm, unmovable. The pushback came, of course. Confusion disguised as concern, hurt framed as betrayal. But Elena no longer rushed to soothe it. She was busy building something else. Late one night, she stood in front of the mirror, holding the dress she'd chosen, not the one meant to impress, but the one that felt like breathing. She caught her own reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back, not because she looked different, because she stood differently. This new plan wasn't revenge. It wasn't escape. It was alignment. Elena realized she wasn't hiding the wedding. She was protecting it. Protecting it from expectations that would hollow it out. From people who saw her milestones as optional. From the old role that demanded she make herself smaller so others could shine. The secret wasn't secrecy at all. It was sovereignty. And as the final details fell into place, Elena felt something she hadn't associated with family milestones in a long time. Anticipation without dread. Joy without performance. Peace without permission. For the first time, the life she was building didn't require approval to feel real. It simply was. And that, she knew, would change everything that came next. The first person to arrive wasn't early because she was anxious. She was early because she cared. Elena was standing near the long wooden table, adjusting a cluster of wildflowers, when Rachel's car pulled into the gravel drive. Dust lifted briefly in the late afternoon light, then settled again, as if the land itself recognized her. Rachel stepped out smiling, sleeves rolled up, already scanning the space like someone preparing to help rather than inspect. Where do you want me? She asked. Not do you need me, but how can I be useful? Something in Elena's chest softened. That question had been absent from her life for a long time. Soon after, her grandmother arrived, moving slowly but with unmistakable purpose. Margaret didn't ask about seating charts or schedules. She took Elena's hands in both of hers and held them for a moment longer than necessary. This feels right, she said quietly. I'm glad you trusted yourself. Elena hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that until her throat tightened. As the afternoon unfolded, people arrived not in a rush, not in clusters of obligation, but steadily, each presence deliberate. Friends who had shown up during breakups, career pivots, quiet crises. Co-workers who respected her boundaries. Neighbors who had become family simply by consistency. No one asked why certain people weren't there. No one filled the air with polite excuses. They filled it with laughter, with movement, with warmth. Elena watched as conversations formed easily, without hierarchy or performance. No one competed for attention. No one waited to be acknowledged. The energy was different, lighter, unforced, alive. This was what it felt like when people chose to be present. As evening approached, someone began stringing lights between the trees. Another guest uncorked wine without being asked. Someone else knelt to fix a wobbling table leg, humming softly as they worked. These weren't grand gestures. They were quieter acts of belonging. Elena caught herself standing still, absorbing it all. When her fiancé came up behind her, "They're really here," he said softly. She nodded. "I know. Not just physically. Emotionally, intentionally." When the ceremony began, there was no dramatic hush, just a natural gathering, chairs turning, conversations tapering off as people leaned in, ready to witness rather than observe. Elena walked forward without music, the ground steady beneath her feet. She wasn't being given away. She was arriving. She met eyes that didn't scan her dress for flaws or compare her to anyone else. Eyes that held recognition, support, pride. Margaret sat in the front row, smiling in a way that felt like blessing, rather than approval. Rachel wiped at her eyes without embarrassment. When Elena spoke her vows, her voice didn't shake, not because she wasn't emotional, but because she was anchored. "I'm standing here," she said, "because the people in this space taught me something important. Love isn't proven by obligation. It's proven by presence." No one clapped. At that, they didn't need to. They nodded. They understood. Afterward, the space filled with sound again, laughter, glasses clinking, feet moving across stone and grass. There were no assigned roles, no performative speeches, no awkward traditions meant to signal unity. Unity was already there. Later, as dusk settled and the lights glowed softly, Elena stepped back for a moment, watching it all from the edge. This was what showing up looked like. Not dramatic rescues. Not public declarations, just people who stayed. She realized then that family wasn't something you waited to be chosen into. It was something you built patiently, honestly, without shrinking. The people here hadn't come because they had to. They came because they wanted to. And that choice, simple, clear, unforced, was the greatest gift she had ever received. Elena breathed in, the night cool and gentle against her skin, and understood something with absolute certainty. She had never been hard to love. She had simply been waiting in the wrong rooms. Now, surrounded by the family she chose and who chose her back, Elena Marlowe was no longer waiting at all. The same sun rose over two weddings that morning, but it illuminated very different truths. At Elena's ceremony, the day unfolded without urgency. Breakfast was shared around a long table, mismatched mugs warming hands as laughter drifted easily through the air. No one checked schedules obsessively. No one whispered about who hadn't arrived yet. Everything that mattered was already there. Miles away, in the hotel ballroom polished to perfection, the other wedding moved according to plan, at least on paper. Vendors hurried. Music tested. Programs aligned carefully on each chair. The room looked full, impressive, curated. But something was missing. At Elena's venue, chairs filled naturally. People arrived early, not to be seen, but to help. Someone adjusted flowers. Someone else calmed a nervous child. There was no rush to start because no one feared being left behind. Presence wasn't enforced, it was assumed. When Elena stepped outside, the air carried the scent of greenery and warm bread. Guests turned toward her not because they were instructed to, but because they noticed, because they cared. No one whispered comparisons. No one measured her against anyone else. She wasn't competing for significance. She already had it. Meanwhile, at the other wedding, the clock ticked louder with every passing minute. A few chairs near the front remained conspicuously empty. People glanced around, then at their phones, then away again. Someone murmured, "Maybe traffic?" Someone else said, "They'll be here." They weren't. The officiant adjusted the order slightly, shifting guests forward to close the gaps. A photographer changed angles, careful to frame fullness where it didn't quite exist. Smiles held but tightly. At Elena's ceremony, no one needed to be rearranged. People stood close by choice. When vows were spoken, the silence wasn't tense. It was attentive. Every word landed where it was meant to. When laughter broke out, it was unrestrained. When tears came, they were shared. There was no audience. Only witnesses. At the other wedding, applause came on cue. Toasts praised appearances, achievements, optics. Compliments echoed, polished, familiar, rehearsed. But they floated, untethered, because something essential hadn't been invited. Connection. Later, as Elena moved through the evening, hugging guests, sharing food, listening to stories, she noticed how unself-conscious everything felt. No one was documenting every Moment for proof. Photos were taken, yes, but not to justify the day's worth. The joy didn't need validation. It existed regardless. Elsewhere, phones buzzed more insistently. Messages were checked between dances. A few guests quietly scrolled through social feeds, pausing longer than expected on unfamiliar images. Asterisk a long table under open sky. Soft lights. Familiar faces missing from this room. Questions formed. Then, stalled. At Elena's wedding, the night deepened into warmth. Music played not because it was scheduled, but because someone picked up a guitar. Dancing happened without choreography. Conversations stretched without agenda. No one worried about what the day looked like. It felt right. Standing at the edge of it all, Elena understood something with startling clarity. One wedding was built on obligation, symmetry, and appearances. The other was built on choice, honesty, and presence. One needed constant maintenance to hold together. The other held itself. Elena didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt something better. Confirmation. Love that is chosen doesn't need to compete. And belonging that is real doesn't need to be announced. As the night settled around her chosen family, Elena Marlowe knew without bitterness, without regret, that she had stepped fully into the reality she deserved. And she had never been more at peace. The photos didn't spread all at once. They surfaced quietly, the way truth usually does, unannounced, undeniable, and impossible to gather back once released. At first, it was a single image posted by Elena's cousin, a wide shot of the long table under open sky, lanterns glowing softly as dusk settled. No caption beyond a simple heart emoji. No explanation. No tags meant to provoke. Just presence. Then another appeared. Elena laughing mid-conversation, her head tilted back, hair loose, no forced pose in sight. Someone else shared a short video, music drifting, bare feet on stone, voices overlapping in easy joy. The algorithm did the rest. Across phones and screens, people began to notice something strange. Familiar faces, relatives, friends, elders were all together, smiling in a way that looked unguarded, not stiff, not ceremonial. Real. Meanwhile, at the other wedding, carefully curated images were being uploaded with precision. Perfect angles, balanced lighting, posed smiles, captions filled with words like dream, perfect, finally. But something didn't land. Viewers lingered longer on Elena's photos. They zoomed in. They scrolled back. They noticed who was there and who wasn't, where they were expected to be. Questions started softly. Wait, aren't these from the same family? Why is grandma there? I thought the parents were at the other wedding. No one accused. No one needed to. The contrast spoke on its own. In group chats that had been quiet for years, messages reappeared. Did you know Elena got married too? Why didn't anyone tell us? This looks different. At the hotel ballroom, phones buzzed during the reception. Guests excused themselves to the restroom and didn't return right away. Bridesmaids huddled near outlets, scrolling with tight expressions. Someone finally said it out loud. They went to hers. The words landed like a dropped glass sharp. Impossible to ignore. In the images from Elena's wedding, there was no effort to prove anything. No hashtags defending choices. No explanations correcting narratives. That was the most unsettling part. Elena wasn't just visible. She was unbothered. As the photos continued to circulate, the story shifted without her saying a word. The years of reasonable, flexible, she'll understand unraveled in the space between two frames. One crowded but hollow, the other simple and full. People began connecting dots they had once avoided. Who always adjusted? Who always showed up? Who was always asked to wait? And who finally didn't. By the next morning, Elena sat on the terrace with a cup of coffee, phone face down on the table. She hadn't posted anything herself. She didn't need to. The exposure wasn't about humiliation. It was about contrast. About what happens when one person stops shrinking and allows the truth to exist in plain sight. She watched sunlight move across the stone floor and felt no urge to check messages. No pull to clarify or defend. The world had seen enough. For years, they controlled the picture by deciding who was cropped out. This time, Elena didn't fight for space in their frame. She built her own and let the light do the rest. The call came 2 days later. Elena was folding linen napkins on the terrace when her phone vibrated against the stone table. She didn't rush to answer. She already knew who it would be. The silence had lasted just long enough to turn uncomfortable for them. When she finally picked up, her mother didn't ask how she was. Instead, she exhaled sharply and said, "Do you have any idea how this looks? Not what happened. Not are you okay? Not even we missed you. Just optics." Her father's voice joined in quickly, clipped and irritated, as if this were a business problem gone public. "People are talking. Elena. Family, friends, colleagues. We're getting messages asking why half the family wasn't at the main wedding." The main wedding. Elena leaned back in her chair and watched the olive branches sway in the breeze. She let the pause stretch long enough to make them uneasy. So, she said calmly, "That's why you're calling." Her mother bristled. "Don't twist this. We're hurt. We feel blindsided. You made a spectacle of this posting photos, letting people assume things." Elena almost smiled. "I didn't post anything," she replied. "Other people did. The people who showed up." Silence cracked open on the line. Her father cleared his throat. "That's not the point. The point is everyone thinks we chose your sister over you." Elena's voice stayed steady. "You did. That's not fair." Her mother snapped. "We were trying to keep the peace. You know how emotional she is. We didn't want drama." There it was, the familiar deflection. Not regret. Not accountability. Just justification polished to sound reasonable. "You didn't call to apologize," Elena said gently. "You called because you're embarrassed." Her mother scoffed. "Of course we're embarrassed. We look heartless." "No," Elena corrected. "You look accurate." Another silence, thicker this time. Her father lowered his voice, attempting damage control. "We think it would help if you made a statement. Something simple, clarifying that there was no conflict. That this was just different plans." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, not from pain, but from clarity. "For years," she said, "I was the one asked to smooth things over, to explain away your choices, to absorb the discomfort so no one else had to feel it. I'm not doing that anymore." Her mother's tone sharpened. "So you're just going to let people think the worst of us?" "I'm going to let people think," Elena replied. "That's the difference." They didn't like that answer. Her mother sighed dramatically. "You've always been so cold when you're upset." Elena smiled then, a quiet, private smile. "I'm not upset. I'm done performing." No one raised their voice after that. There was nothing left to escalate. Without Elena bending, there was no leverage, no script to follow. Finally, her father said stiffly, "We hope you're satisfied." Elena looked out at the long table, now empty but still warm with memory. "I'm peaceful," she said. "That's better." She ended the call without waiting for a reply. For the first time, their discomfort wasn't her responsibility. And that, more than the photos, was what unsettled them most. Grandma called that evening, not to ask what had happened. She already knew. News traveled fast through the family grapevine, and faster through the quiet channels of truth that didn't need exaggeration. When Elena answered, her grandmother's voice was steady, warm, and unmistakably grounded. "I hear they're upset," Grandma said. Elena didn't deny it. "They're embarrassed." A soft, knowing hum came through the line. "Yes, that's different from remorse." Elena closed her eyes, letting the words settle. Her grandmother had always been precise with language. She didn't waste it on comfort that avoided truth. "I want you to listen carefully," Grandma continued, "because this is the part they'll never say out loud." Elena shifted in her chair. "People who confuse peace with obedience panic. When obedience ends," Grandma said, "they don't miss the person. They miss the role." The sentence landed like a cornerstone. "For years," Grandma went on, "you were the quiet one who absorbed the cost so everyone else could stay comfortable. That wasn't kindness. That was conditioning. And the moment you stepped out of it, they lost control of the story." Elena felt her throat tighten, not with grief, but recognition. "They're calling it betrayal because they don't have another word for consequences," Grandma said. "And embarrassment feels safer than admitting they failed you." Outside, the wind moved through the olive trees, steady and unbothered. "I keep wondering if I should have said something earlier," Elena admitted softly. Grandma didn't rush to answer. "Maybe. But here's the truth: you didn't survive because someone rescued you. You survived because you learned to stand upright on your own. That matters." There was a pause. Then her grandmother added, firmer now, "And don't let anyone tell you this was revenge. Revenge seeks reaction. What you chose was alignment." Elena smiled, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. "You didn't expose them," Grandma said. "They exposed themselves by refusing to show up. All you did was stop hiding the evidence." The call ended with a simple, grounding instruction: eat well, rest, don't explain yourself. Elena stayed seated long after, phone resting in her lap. For years, she'd been told to be flexible, reasonable, forgiving. Now she understood something deeper. Asterisk. Boundaries weren't walls. They were the spine that allowed her to stand without bending. And this time, she wasn't standing alone. The days that followed were quiet in a way Elena had never known. Not the tense quiet of waiting for the next message. Not the hollow silence that came after being ignored. This was a settled quiet, the kind that exists when nothing is being demanded of you. Mornings began slowly. Sunlight slipped through the olive branches and painted soft shadows across the stone floor. Elena drank her coffee without checking her phone, without bracing herself for disappointment. No one needed her to explain, to fix, to smooth over what they didn't want to face. And that, she realized, was the real shift. The world didn't collapse because she stopped bending. It expanded. Her parents didn't call again. Not with apologies. Not with accusations. The absence of noise told her everything she needed to know. They weren't reflecting. They were recalculating. And for once, that wasn't her problem to solve. In the evenings, Elena sat at the long table with the people who had chosen her, laughing, sharing food, letting conversation wander without fear. No one compared her. No one asked her to be smaller, so someone else could feel larger. There was no dramatic confrontation. No final speech. Just distant sand peace filling the space it left behind. Elena understood then that revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't require humiliation or retaliation. The most unsettling outcome for people who relied on her silence was seeing her content without them. Peace was the consequence they never planned for. She didn't need to be vindicated. She didn't need them to understand. She had stepped into a life where understanding herself was enough. And that became the ending they couldn't rewrite. Message and lesson for the listener. If you spent your life being reasonable, flexible, or the one who understands, hear this. Clearly, you are not required to shrink to keep others comfortable. You don't need revenge. You don't need permission. Sometimes the most powerful response is choosing a life so full, so grounded, and so peaceful that it no longer leaves room for those who only valued you when you were. Bending. Build your own table. The right people will find their way to it.